And good evening. We are doing it live here in the 5 o'clock hour on 790 KBC. Good evening. Mottek On Money, 5 nights a week for you live on the air here on 790 KBC. Streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com and the on-demand Mottek On Money podcast at kbc.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Big week has started on Wall Street with a big rally today. The Dow more than 500 points. The major averages did bounce back today after the S&P 500 and NASDAQ all fell into correction territory last week. That is down 10% or more from their recent highs. Investors looking ahead to the Federal Reserve decision on interest rates coming later this week. Latest reports on jobs. We'll also be getting more earnings reports. And, of course, we're watching the latest developments in the Middle East. Some analysts today said relief that the Israel-Hamas war had not drawn in other combatants in the Middle East over the weekend was helping to boost sentiment today. Oil futures moved sharply lower today with the price of crude oil down about 3%, in fact, hitting a 3-week low. We'll have a closer look at the oil markets here shortly. The shares of Dow component McDonald's rising today after the fast food restaurant chain reported third-quarter earnings that rose above analyst expectations. On Semiconductor posting third-quarter earnings and revenue better than Wall Street estimates, but provided fourth-quarter guidance well below expectations, and that was one of the big losers of the day today. I'll be discussing what's happening in the Middle East this evening as tensions rise. Israel recalling diplomats from Turkey after the Turkish president addressed thousands of demonstrators at a pro-Palestinian rally in Istanbul over the weekend. I'll discuss the latest news in the Middle East tonight with Lisa Daftari, editor of the Foreign Desk. Should the Fed just keep printing unlimited money? At what point does America's debt load matter? The House Budget Committee talked about that recently at a hearing titled Sounding the Alarm, Examining the Need for a Fiscal Commission. I'll discuss that tonight with Romina Bacha, Director of Budget and Entitlements Policy at the Cato Institute. But first on Your Money, the markets, the economy, oil, gold, crypto, and the whole works this evening. Joining us live now is money manager Ken Winans, president of Winans Investments, market historian, author of Investment Atlas 1 and 2, and also Forbes magazine contributor. Ken Winans, thank you very much for taking the call here with a welcomed Wall Street rally with the Dow closing at 511 points today, the NASDAQ rebounding 146, and the S&P 500 up nearly 50. Give us your view of what's happening here at the moment.
Well, Frank, needless to say that over the weekend, I think a lot of people in my industry were a little concerned because, Friday was just downright ugly, and there's a tendency for things to follow through. So the fact that there are people stepping in with money, wanting to buy some stocks, and the more important part was with decent volume. There was actually relatively broad-based buying across all industry sectors, and you need to start seeing that. Now, again, I keep talking about the seasonality of the markets. As we look towards November, December, January, even in volatile times, they typically have a positive bias, which means that if you look at buying some investments today, whether it's stocks or bonds, you'll probably find that they'll perform well going into the later part of the year. And I think that, one of the areas that I look at as kind of a canary is what's going on with the retailers. And when I look at a lot of the retailers that have done a very good job on inventory control, price control, making sure that the consumers that go into the brick and mortar stores have a positive experience, they are doing very well. And I think that means that as we go into the holiday season, I think, this year has not been a great year for too many people. And I think they're looking for a reason to get out and to enjoy themselves. And I wouldn't be surprised to see people be willing to shop again. So, again, retailers we'll talk about in a moment, but it is still a mixed bag. It's earnings, interest rates, fighting inflation headwinds. That theme will continue into 2024.
Right. We started this week with a lot on the horizon with the Fed meeting and decision on interest rates, a statement on the economy. What do you think the Fed is going to do this week?
The Fed is committed to fighting inflation, which I have to, as painful as it is, I'm glad that they are taking care of this. We let it go out of control during COVID. We're trying to rein it back in. And for those people in the audience who have kids and grandkids, you don't want them having an inflation problem. I'd rather have the pain now and not the pain over the next 20 years. When you look at what happened in South and Central America, even in Europe, many parts of Europe, where they let inflation persist, it's a devastating toll on lifestyles. So we do want to get it under control. But Frank, I think to get back to your original question, I do think the Fed is going to stay very committed to fighting inflation. They saw the employment numbers last week. They realize it's still generally good. And I think they're going to stay undeterred going through the rest of this year. Final point on that. The Fed does not like to be a political volleyball. They want to get all the interest rate increases in this year so they cannot be accused of influencing an election next year. That's an age-old issue that the Fed's always dealt with, and I believe they will continue doing it.
All right, we see the price of gold, meanwhile, above $2,000. Near its all-time high here now, down about $1 here after hours at $2,004.70 an ounce. The precious metals have been getting a lift lately, as we've seen in global crises, flight to safety there. And interestingly, the cryptos have rallied. Bitcoin in particular now back close to 34,500. Give us your view of the performance of those two here.
Well, gold is interesting because when you realize that through this entire tumultuous situation we've had since the beginning of last year, gold has been stable. I mean, it's actually up 8% in the last 20 months. I'm talking about looking at not this year, but looking at the entire correction, where you're looking at the S&P down 13, Dow down 9, NASDAQ down 18. Gold is the tortoise and the hare fable. It has been very stable, which goes to show that the old rules about stability hold true. And I've been buying gold, as I've talked about several times. What I would say about the commodities, and I ran a lot of analysis today, there's certainly commodities like sugar and cattle. They are flying right now. I can find other commodities. We talked about wheat with the Ukrainian crisis. Wheat's still in a downtrend. So it is a commodity picker's market, just as it is a stock picker's market. But if you ask me to pick between crypto and gold, again, it's the tortoise or the hare. If people go back and look at where crypto was at the end of 2021 and where it is today, it's still got a long ways to go. If you're looking for stability, I would lean toward gold.
All right, let me take a look here. Year to date, Bitcoin up 108% since the start of the year.
And I'll tell you what, Frank, let's go back and see where crypto was at the end of 2021, and I'll bet it's still down 30, 40, or maybe 50% from its high. I mean, here's the point. Yes, there are rallies in all assets. I think what people are looking for right now is stability. They want one part of their portfolio that doesn't give them eye-popping volatility every day. So people who are crypto experts, and listen, I was just at the Schwab conference last week. The crypto asset folks were well in attendance at that event. And I think crypto should be put in a portfolio in commodities, but it also means you've got to be very disciplined on your holds and your stop points, and you just don't want to take another hit with it. So I think crypto within a commodity portfolio makes a lot of sense. Crypto by itself, I'm not a buyer of that. I think it's dangerous.
All right. What about the Magnificent Seven, which led the rally earlier this year? Has the AI rally resumed here with this bounce-back rally today? And what do you see ahead for the market, given the wall of worry that we're all looking at here at the moment?
I have one stock, and for anybody who followed today, Tesla was down almost 6% again today. And, here again is a stock that many people were committed to for personal reasons and of the belief that they were going to clean up Detroit's clock as far as cars go. But here's my problem with just looking at this. If you want to look at Tesla for what it has actually done this year, it is up 60% year to date, even though it's corrected 25% this month. But again, if you go back and look at it 20 months, it is down 44%. Frank, that's the problem. That's very high volatility. That's things bouncing around in a world that many people are just tired. We've had 20 months of this volatility. Again, I think that clients, or certainly my clients, but I would just suggest the listeners at whole, try to find those investments that maybe are not flashy, they're not in the news all the time, but they've been very stable. They're a cork in the ocean. They're staying above the fray. And I think that everybody needs to look for those plays as we go into November, December, January. And I'll talk about some of my plays in a moment like that. But quite frankly, I'm looking for things that are green the last 20 months, year to date, quarter to quarter, and their minimum hits for the last month. I am looking for those names, and they are out there.
All right. And any specifics in the AI world? We did see some of the Western Digital, for example, getting a lift today. I'm not sure how involved they are in AI, but up nearly $3 back to 41 and change. That stock had taken a hit recently. Anything else that's getting your attention in the AI space here at the moment?
Well, it's interesting that you bring up AI because I'm looking at silicon semiconductor industry, and actually they were on the top of the list and at the bottom of the list today. I'm looking at Celsius Technologies, which is again a semiconductor company. It was down 9%. Analog Devices was down 3%. But then when I go and look at who are the big winners today, well, there are a lot of the big tech names that were flying high. So again, it goes to show anybody who's using industry ETFs are probably really struggling right now to try to get a beat on what to do. But if you're a stock picker, you can find those names. I think AI, like everything else, is going to be governed by certainly talk about the industry. But I think that the fact that the Biden administration came out today and talked about new regulations, as a business guy, I don't like hearing this, but new regulations on AI, standardizing things, that all means trying to modulate this industry. Those type of headwinds are not what allow things to move cleanly forward. So again, people need to be very careful about hype and look for stability and good names.
All right. We see oil, you mentioned, at a 3-week low here at 82 and change here at the moment, pulling back from above 90 recently. What about the oil names here?
I would certainly look at, I'm going to say oil and commodities in general. There is a seasonality to these things, and oil typically does not do well in the fall. We're past the summer drive season. Usage suddenly drops, and so we do find that this is actually not a bad thing. This is falling into the seasonal norm. But also, there are clearly some names out there that people could look at. I know that there was some disappointment when Chevron bought out Hess. Everybody thought that Hess would just take off. No, Hess had been a stronger player all through the correction, so I wasn't surprised by that whatsoever. But I think that if you're going to play commodities, I would be more interested in looking at something like the DBC Commodity Index, which is 63% oil. I would play that more than trying to cherry pick which oil and gas company is going to do well, although the consolidation in this industry is going to continue well into next year.
All right, coming off that big conference you attended, Ken, what about the banks and commercial real estate? Can you give us an update on what's happening?
Well, it's funny we're talking about real estate. Let me start in on that. I actually was really surprised today when I ran my real estate research on my real estate index, which always has a 30-day lead over Case-Shiller. Now, it's no great surprise. Nationwide, real estate is down about 7% on the year. We all know the story. Anybody in California with a home knows that the realtors are telling us that we need to adjust our thinking. But what's very interesting to me is that it is not a universal real estate in America. I was absolutely shocked to find out that the Midwest and the Northeast, believe it or not, are showing some signs of life. They actually had positive numbers in the third quarter, whereas in the West and also in the South, which have been as we know, the two big popular areas for migration from and to, they're both down significantly. So again, I think that's going to continue as we look forward on. I think it's more of a price issue. It's where prices of real estate rose too far and too fast. We certainly know it happened in California. It's happened in other parts of the West. But, these are all as I'm going to call the grand readjustment with us learning to deal with basically non-zero interest rate environment. That world is gone, and everything is readjusting.
All right. What about Vegas? A lot of Southern Californians picking Vegas and other states for business reasons, and, of course, Florida. Maybe some of the folks getting sick of the heat and humidity over the summer, and maybe they're moving back to to places north. Maybe that's one of the reasons there. But what else do you see happening in your real estate index?
Well, as somebody in the Schwab Index or conference pointed out to me, there are some tax havens in the Northeast. One of them is New Hampshire. So proudly, there are many places saying that they're well-run states. Frank, this is one of the things as we chronicle the post-COVID era, we are going to look at that the states that we call the blue states, more heavy-handed government, more heavy-handed regulation, more top-down command and control, actually have higher levels of inflation to other states that we would just say are more purple to red, more balanced. Government is not as intrusive. And I think that that's going to be the telltale sign. I mean, certainly any of us in California, you go out for a meal, you go to the grocery store, you go to fill your car up, you certainly don't think you're getting any bargains here. It's very expensive. I can tell you when I go to Vegas firsthand, or I go to Salt Lake City, or I go to Phoenix, that I just don't feel that things are as expensive there as they are here. I think that will continue. The migration to Vegas, Phoenix, Salt Lake City, certainly Texas and Florida, I think those are things that continue to happen. When I was at the Schwab conference, I did hear there were a lot, especially in Southern California, a lot of some very prominent wealth management firms very much thinking about moving because they just feel that they're being overburdened in regulation and taxation. So I think the migrations are alive and well, and that will continue putting pressure on the California real estate market. But again, the Schwab conference was very much on the world has changed. With the same thing I just said a moment ago, we've got to get used to that money is no longer free. The governments have budgetary constraints on what they can and cannot spend both at the federal and state level, and that a lot of people are waking up that the world is shifting, especially for the millennials or younger people in this industry that have never been through an inflation cycle. This is a wake-up call.
All right, and before we let you off the hook here, Ken, any other specific places where you are putting money now and or taking it off the table?
Frank, I'm going to be a little different than all the other guests you have, and I'm going to give two areas that you probably haven't talked about at all: healthcare and retail. Healthcare, because it is inflation resistant, let's face it, we hate it, but they are able to pass on price increases. Three stocks that have been those corks in the water. One is Novo Nordisk, a pharmaceutical company. Another one is Vertex Pharmaceutical, VRTX. And then McKesson, MCK. Stocks are performing great. Earnings were great. I would go with them. On retail, my number one favorite is TJX, symbol TJX. They are running everything beautifully. And then it's a bit of a gas play, but there is a convenience store in the Southeast called Casey's General Stores, CASY. You'll never see them in California. But again, another company, well-managed, been around for 50 years. And so look for these names of these companies that have figured out how to make money in this tough environment. And then, of course, I talked about gold. I think everybody should, quite frankly, consider having some gold in their portfolio as we go through the remainder of this year and see how the economy looks next year.
All right, terrific, Ken. Well, thank you very much for covering all the bases here tonight. That is Money Manager Ken Winans, president of Winans Investments, market historian, the author of Investment Atlas 1 and 2, also Forbes magazine contributor. Ken, thank you very much for coming to the line here this evening.
Thank you, Frank. Good night.
Good night. Thank you very much. And right after the freeways we go here on this Monday evening here on 790 KBC. Weather cooling down, October winding down, November just around the corner, heading into the holiday season. But, of course, traffic is still jammed and drivers are still aggressive. And, unfortunately, as you just heard, accidents happen. So if you're hurt in an accident, call my friend and designated super lawyer and best lawyer in America, Clark Fielding, and his incredible team at Fielding Law. When you call Fielding Law, they don't pressure you. They treat you with kindness and respect. They'll gather information on your accident and set up a customized plan. If I was hurt or anyone that I care about gets hurt in an accident, I tell them to immediately call the Fielding Law team. Make it easy for yourself and put the number in your phone right now under the word accident. That number is 833-88-SHARK, 833-88-SHARK. Don't handle accidents on your own. Call someone who has a ton of experience navigating the insurance companies. So many 790 KBC listeners have taken my advice, and you should too. Clark Fielding understands that the right lawyer will make or break your case. Don't go at it alone. If hurt in any kind of an accident, car, truck, motorcycle, pedestrian, animal bite, slip, trip, fall, you name it, call the one to trust. Clark Fielding of Fielding Law. The number's 833-88-SHARK, or go to clarkthesharklaw.com. That's clarkthesharklaw.com. 790 KBC welcomes Richard Marks Solo and KT Tunstall coming to the Cerritos Center for the Performing Arts November 12th. Tickets are on sale now at cerritoscenter.com. And right now, caller 9 wins at 1-888-790-5222. You can get a pair of tickets to the show if you're caller 9. Call right now, 1-888-790-5222. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. The stock market starting the week with a rally. The Dow 511 points at the bell today to 32,929. The S&P 500 gained nearly 50 points at 4,167, and the Nasdaq gained nearly 150 at 12,789. The yield in the 10-year note, which impacts the fixed-rate mortgage rates out there, at 4.90% after popping above 5% in the last week or so. Price of oil suddenly at a 3-week low, pulling back 3% today, down after hours here, down 31 cents at $82.62 a barrel in New York. The price of gold still above $2,000 an ounce, near its all-time high, down 90 cents at $2,004.70 an ounce. Western Digital, based in Irvine, among the winners here today, up nearly $3 a share to $41.80. In the crypto space, we see a Bitcoin up about $15 now at $34,479. Ethereum up 9, back to $1,811. And Doge at 7 cents. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. Good evening. At what point does America's debt load matter? Should the Fed just keep printing unlimited amounts of money with no impact on the dollar? We're already seeing gold moving above $2,000 an ounce recently as inflation continues to be a big concern for the Federal Reserve. We'll be hearing from the Fed this week when they have their big policy meeting, and come out with a statement on the economy and a decision on short-term interest rates. It's widely expected they will be holding the line this time around on short-term rates when they finish up their meeting. And we'll be hearing from the Fed chairman later this week. Well, let's bring in someone who's taken a closer look at this. The House Budget Committee recently held a hearing titled Sounding the Alarm, examining the need for a fiscal commission to try to rein in federal spending and get better control of the federal budget. Let's bring in Romina Baccia now, Director of Budgets and Entitlements Policy at the Cato Institute. Romina, thank you very much for joining us here and for tackling this big issue. Tell us what we need to know about that hearing and where we are with America's debt load at this point.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, this hearing, most of the lawmakers that testified at this hearing agreed that Congress has been unable to tackle the drivers of our fiscal crisis, namely entitlement program spending that is growing much, much faster than the economy. And the primary culprits here are Medicare and Social Security. The Treasury actually put out a report last year that identified that 95% of the U.S. government's unfunded obligations originate from only 2 government programs. And you can guess it was Medicare and Social Security. And so in this hearing, Congress was examining the need for a fiscal commission, an independent body or a body composed in part of members of Congress and independent experts to tackle entitlement reform, which has been an intractable problem for Congress for very obvious political reasons. However, there was one dissenting voice at the hearing, a former member of Congress and a former chairman of the House Budget Committee, surprisingly so, Representative Yarmouth, who was basically suggesting that Congress shouldn't worry about borrowing money or paying interest on the debt, that they should just stop doing any of those things and just print the money and have the government spend as much as is necessary to do whatever the government feels it's necessary to do. Of course, if Congress actually heeded his advice, this would lead to massive inflation, much worse than we've seen in recent years.
But that seems to be the thinking at the moment, right? Just keep on printing it and don't worry about it.
That is the current modus operandi of this Congress, absolutely. But we are seeing signs that the markets are catching on to this, and they don't appreciate the direction in which the federal government budget is heading. One of the key indicators here is that bond yields keep fluctuating around 5%. That's fairly high. That's a historic high that we haven't seen since 2007. And many investors have been very vocal that they're concerned about the long-run trajectory of the U.S. government debt, that we're already at 100% of GDP, and the government has shown no signs of stopping the borrowing. The deficit this year is $2 trillion. Those are deficits that we normally only see during periods of crises. We're not in a crisis right now. The economy is relatively strong. Now is the time to cut back and reduce the deficit, but the Biden administration is doing the exact opposite, asking Congress for more and more money. They've now asked for almost $160 billion in additional deficit spending that Congress will consider in the next few weeks to help fight the war in Ukraine, to support Israel, to provide disaster relief, and also to plus up a bunch of other accounts like child care. And so there seems to be no end to the deficit spending spree, but markets are saying, Congress, we're watching. You're going to have to pay higher interest rates if you're going to keep going down this road. And really what markets, I think, want to see is a plan for Congress to rein in deficits and spending in the future, and that starts with reforming Medicare and Social Security.
All right, it looks like the outlook is pretty grim here. I guess coming out of that hearing, the news that the total deficit's projected to exceed $110 trillion over the next 30 years as the federal debt doubles to more than 200% of the whole economy, the gross domestic product. So we're heading for a train wreck here.
Absolutely, and if you just think about these, sound like really big numbers, but the current federal debt is about $26 trillion. So what does that mean? That is how much debt the U.S. government has accumulated over its entire history. And now we're talking about more than quadrupling that over just the next 30 years. That is clearly unsustainable, as well as doubling the debt, which we also accumulated over the entire history of the United States to now almost 100% of GDP. And to double that in that time period, it just shows that we are on a deeply unsustainable path. And I think the only way we're going to get out of this is if Congress recognizes its own political limitations and empowers a fiscal commission with real authority that is modeled after the successful base realignment and closure commission. And that is something that one of the lawmakers at this hearing in the House mentioned. Former Senator Rob Portman said, you know what worked? BRAC worked. And I think BRAC can work here too.
All right. And the new Speaker of the House, has he spoken on this issue? And what's the outlook now under his new leadership?
He has spoken on this issue. I would say his remarks were fairly general. He just said this is an issue we need to tackle, and we need a bipartisan commission to work on this. I look forward to working with the new Speaker and other members of Congress to put, more shape on this proposal so that we have something workable moving forward. Because what the American people don't need right now is another fig leaf bipartisan commission proposal that will ultimately fail. We've had plenty of those in recent years, including Simpson-Bowles and the Super Committee in 2011, and we don't have any more time to waste. Now it's time to get serious, and that means we need to look at how such a commission would be structured. It should have a majority of independent members. It can have some members of Congress on it as well, but the more we can shield Congress from the political fallout and provide that political cover to get entitlement reform, I think the higher the likelihood that we'll be able to have success with this.
All right, so November 17th is coming up. We hear that the newly elected House Speaker, Mike Johnson's first priority in his new leadership role is to reach a deal on government funding to avert a government shutdown, and the deadline to do that is November 17th. What's the outlook with that right now?
I predict that there will be another continuing resolution. What will be interesting is whether the new speaker will get to keep his position after that. Because just like Speaker McCarthy ended up having to work with Democrats in order to avoid a government shutdown, the dynamics in Congress have not changed. So Speaker Johnson will be faced with the same challenges. And the question is whether the conference can understand that this is just what's necessary in order to avoid the government from shutting down. Not that that would necessarily be the end of the world, but I think if you're going into a government shutdown, you should be very clear about why you're doing it and what you're hoping to get out of it and why you think that going into a government shutdown will give you more leverage to accomplish those political goals versus negotiating these things under regular order.
Romina Bacha, Director of Budgets and Entitlements Policy at the Cato Institute, a terrific watchdog for you, the taxpayer out there. Romina, thank you very much for joining us live here tonight.
Thank you.
Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. Turning to the latest news from the Middle East, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ruling out a ceasefire with Hamas, saying this is a time for war. He's rejected calls for a ceasefire in Gaza, saying it would amount to a surrender to Hamas. Speaking in Tel Aviv today, he cited the Bible as he says this is a time for war. We're watching the armored Israeli forces attack the Gaza Strip's main city from two directions today, targeting the main road linking it to the south of Gaza. Also today, Israel says its forces freed a soldier from Hamas captivity. One of 239 hostages, Israel says, were captured on October 7th by Hamas gunmen from Gaza who rampaged through southern Israeli communities, killing more than 1,400 people on the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. Israel renewing warnings for civilians to move from the north of Gaza to the south as it began an advance to pursue Hamas militants it says are hiding in a labyrinth of tunnels under Gaza City. Iran today said attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq and elsewhere in the region, meanwhile, were a result of what they called wrong American policies, including Washington's support for Israel in its war against the Hamas terror group. Joining me live now is Middle East expert Lisa Daftari, editor of the Foreign Desk on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Foreign Desk News. Lisa Daftari, thank you very much for taking the call and give us the latest news coming across your desk there this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. Basically, we're looking at the second part of this war, as Benjamin Netanyahu said over the weekend, advancing into a more targeted, pinpointed strategy as they move through Gaza and Gaza City, trying to get the hostages out. They were able to get one IDF soldier out today, as you said, and also finding more of those who were believed to be hostages, including two young women. Their bodies were actually found, one decapitated and now taken off the hostage list, but found as murdered by Hamas in their massacre on October 7th. In the meantime, things are also heating up in the region. As we said, Israel is fighting 3 fronts inside Israel and 3 outside of Israel, but the United States involved in the proxy wars as well. For Iran regime proxies in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. Their missiles pointed towards Israel, but also towards U.S. assets inside those countries, and Saudi Arabia also getting involved and on guard today as Yemen, the Houthi proxy, is also fighting Saudi forces there as well. So the tensions are extremely high. We don't know who else will be getting involved, but it looks like this will be a very long war, as Israel keeps telling us. And Bibi Netanyahu reminded us again today this will be a very long war and something planned to eradicate extremist terrorism and specifically Hamas from raining terror on the region.
And Turkey, the president of Turkey making news over the weekend. Israel now recalling diplomats from Turkey after the president of Turkey accused Israel of behaving like a war criminal, in his words, making the comments while addressing thousands of demonstrators at a pro-Palestinian rally in Istanbul. Any more information about Israel's response to what he had to say?
No, Israel is actually just responding to anti-Semites of the world unite. So we have seen over the weekend and over the last 3 weeks how there have been almost pogroms, if you have seen the footage coming out of Russia, for example, when it was a flight from Israel landed and you can see mobs of people rushing towards the escalator to go upstairs and try to attack Israelis and Jews who landed in their country. We've seen in Turkey as well, on the streets of Istanbul, on the streets of London, Rome. It just seems as though they're using the tensions between Hamas and Israel, and this massacre of Hamas against Israel as a predicate to just begin any sort of attack or protest against Jews. We're also seeing it on college campuses here in the United States, and very, very unfortunately, campuses where they have a very high Jewish student population. Cornell, for example, students not able to go freely about campus when there were threats about how you should slit a Jew's throat if you see one, students posting these kinds of comments and threats online against Jewish students. So this is going on all around the world, not just in the region. It's spilled over to the rest of the world as well, and we're seeing a lot of anti-Semitism, unfortunately.
Unbelievable, unthinkable. And that situation in Russia, hundreds of people stormed into the main airport in Russia's Dagestan region, right, and onto the landing field just yesterday, chanting anti-Semitic slogans and seeking passengers arriving on a flight from Tel Aviv, Israel. And again, what is the U.S. response to that horrific situation there?
You know, you're seeing John Kirby, you're seeing, others at the State Department fielding questions by reporters. And today I call them the Hamas press corps, because it seems like the journalists are not doing their homework in terms of understanding this conflict, in terms of understanding the nuances. I know the State Department has had a very firm line about calling out anti-Semitism. The White House has not done such a great job. When they were asked about anti-Semitism last week, the White House press secretary, she called it, well, there's anti-Semitism, but there's also Islamophobia. She equated the two, whereas right now we know that there is a lot of anti-Semitism against 2% of the population here. Jews make such a small percentage of the population, but they're 60% of the hate crimes committed in the United States, according to the FBI, are committed against Jews. So we do have a serious problem. This would not be tolerated against any other race, religion, culture. And unfortunately, there is mixed messaging coming from the White House. But fortunately, I should say, the State Department has handled the question well. The bigger wake-up call for me as a journalist, and I've been working in this arena covering the Middle East for many years, is the lack of education and really the blindsidedness, or perhaps there's deep-seated bigotry that really comes with that, of these reporters when they go to these press briefings and ask these questions that are extremely loaded, and just looking at one side, looking at perhaps the Palestinian casualties, and not really understanding that that is the consequence of war, as Bibi Netanyahu said today. Nobody wants that death toll to go behind. Nobody actually can verify that death toll, to be honest. We don't want even one death on either side, but the truth of the matter is to look at the root of the situation, whether you want to look at Iran's regime supporting terror, you want to look at, of course, right now, the Hamas attack on October 7th. And I think the upsetting part about all this is, the farther we get away from October 7th, as the weeks go by, the more people will forget about this massacre of Hamas against Israel. It will become this horrific one-sided narrative, a propaganda show against Jews worldwide. And that's unfortunately what we're seeing unfold.
Lisa Dafchari, editor of the Foreign Desk. Lisa, thank you very much for that important update tonight. Look forward to speaking with you again very soon. And we'll continue our coverage here on Mottek On Money on 790 KBC. Stay tuned now for Royal Oaks and the 790 KBC News Blitz coming your way next right here on 790 KBC.